Okay, so they're going to be handing out some documents for you. We're going to actually take a look at some things together today because what I wanted to do is try to put some legs on some of the things that we talked about last time. And I say that because as a historian, it's important for me not to just talk about this contemporary moment, but to try to put it in some kind of larger context. This is a very disturbing image in a lot of ways because it's meant to lance our sense of consciousness about the moment that we find ourselves in this country with regard to gun violence. I love this cartoon when it was first produced because the cartoonist really was trying to communicate the insanity in the reason for the number of people that we've found ourselves attracted to, these cases of people killed in public spaces. And you get some of the things here, you know, reached into their pocket, played music too loud, texted in a movie theater. You guys remember that in Florida, the guy that was killed by texting in a movie theater. But the ones that are most disturbing for me in the context of Black Lives Matter are those that involve people of color in public spaces, because that's really what's captured our attention for obvious reasons. And that's where I want to spend my time talking with you today. I shared with you before some conventional wisdom from James Baldwin, who said, the world changes according to the way people see it, and if you can alter even by a milliliter the way that people look at reality, then you can change it. I also told you last time, and I'm going to emphasize this as much as possible today, that it's important for us to understand that, as Kathy Cohen argues, wounds produce narratives. What do you think I mean by that? Wounds produce narratives. Anybody know? What do we mean when we say wounds produce narratives?
You stop talking once you're wounded.
Genius. I love her. Guys, follow me here because I want to say this to you. I want to say it to you quickly, but I really want you to follow me here. Wounds produce narratives literally means this. I just came back from North Carolina where House Bill number 2 was under consideration, right? I was just there over the weekend with an organization called the Network for Public Education. We're having a major conference there with teachers from all over the country, and people are writing to us and saying, how can you go to North Carolina when they have passed this odious law? How can you do that? It's incomprehensible, especially you, Yohuru, of all people, that you would sign off as a member of the board to go to North Carolina, and they've got this legislation that basically is going to restrict people's access to restrooms. How can you do it? Now, our response to them was, well, look, Bruce Springsteen can cancel a concert, right? Because he's a very wealthy individual. But we're a small organization, and a few years ago, about a decade ago, I was part of an organization, still I'm part of an organization called the Organization of American Historians. We, as a body, decided that we were not going to have a conference in St. Louis because they discriminated against African Americans in the Adams Mark Hotel in employment opportunities. So we signed off on that, and the Adams Mark Hotel sued us. Ha ha. We just got from under the debt associated with that lawsuit. And part of what we said is that we're going to go to North Carolina and we're going to make the case while we're in North Carolina that we believe that this law is odious. And we're going to do that in a way that affirms our right as American citizens to go anywhere and to say, you're not going to keep us out of the state of North Carolina. The way to put heat on North Carolina is to bring light to North Carolina, to shine a light on the evil that's happening there in terms of the way that they are configuring that law. That's what we said. Didn't convince anybody, but that's what we said. The reason I raised that is that some of the activists that came after us, right, legitimately, some of the activists that raised concerns, legitimately said, well, you're coming here to talk about education reform. You're coming here to talk about the proliferation of charter schools. You're coming here to talk about unfair teacher evaluations. You're coming here to talk about testing. And all those things are evil, and we understand, but you got to appreciate that right now the wound that we're experiencing in North Carolina is the wound associated with how people are treating lesbian, gay, and transgendered persons. See, the wound has produced the narrative here in North Carolina. That's why there's this energy in this movement. That's why we wanted you to stand up and to say, we're not going to come. Because the wound produced the narrative. I'll give you a better example, a contemporary example with regard to Black Lives Matter. You have people all the time, come up to me and go, I don't know why it has to be Black Lives Matter. Why can't it be all lives matter? It can't be all lives matter because the wound produced the narrative. The injury to persons of color is what led to the movement, which has led to the dialogue, which is why we're talking about it. It's not like we just woke up one day and said, it'd be kind of cool if we just came up with a hashtag, Black Lives Matter, right? Literally the wound, the injury, the Michael Brown and the Tamir Rice and the Sandra Bland and the insert name here is what produced this conversation. Do you guys follow me? Okay, good. Having said that to you, it's important for us to recognize that even when we can see in a contemporary moment the historical roots of what led to that moment. And I'm going to argue with you today, or argue for you today, that Black Lives Matter is unique, but it's not necessarily a new phenomenon. In order to do that, I want to go back to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King in a speech that probably very few of you have ever seen before, but I want to share it with you because we're so accustomed to talking about the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King in terms of the March on Washington. But I want to present Dr. King to you in Montgomery, Alabama, as he's trying to get the citizens of Montgomery to stay off the buses in that city after Rosa Parks refuses to give up her seat. I want to tell you a couple of things that you probably already know. You already know that Rosa Parks wasn't the first person to refuse to give up her seat. The first person was a woman named Claudette Colvin, but even that's a lie because the fact of the matter is people were always refusing to give up their seats in Montgomery. Rosa Parks just happened to hit the jackpot because, do you guys follow what I'm saying here? No. Then all those things coalesced, because this happens all the time for the people that don't. Police brutality is not a new phenomenon in the city of New York. Eric Garner's not the first person to die at the hand. There were plenty of lawsuits in the 80s, 87, 86, 87, 84 against the New York City. But at this moment, it happened at a time in the aftermath of Trayvon Martin, in the aftermath of the Supreme Court rolling back sections of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It happened in a moment we were paying attention, and then you get lightning in a bottle. You guys understand what I'm saying now? Yeah. Okay, good. All right. So here's Dr. King in 1955 trying to galvanize the people of Montgomery to stay off the buses. And what he says to them is instructive for a couple of reasons, partly because we're talking to college students, and partly because we're talking to an audience of people that lived through this. So they're going to recognize immediately what I'm talking about. They're already shaking their heads. They're going to know exactly where I am. Here's what Dr. King says. We're here in a specific sense because of the bus situation in Montgomery. And the audience is interrupting them. Yes, they're testifying. We're here because we're determined to get the situation corrected. But listen to what he says. This is critical. The situation is not at all what? New. I need you guys to follow me here. What King is saying is that the womb produced the narrative. We're here specifically because of what happened to Rosa Parks. But it doesn't mean that this is a new phenomenon. You guys follow me? Watch where he goes next. I love this. The problem has existed over endless years. And he's interrupting now. People are testifying. That's right. Amen, Reverend. We know. He continues. For many years now, Negroes in Montgomery and so many other areas have been inflicted with the paralysis of a crippling fear on buses in our community. On so many occasions, Negroes have been intimidated and humiliated and oppressed because of the sheer fact that they were Negroes. What he says next is very important for college students. He says, I don't have time this evening to go into the what? But I need you to know something. He knew the history. He knew the history. I mean, I think one of the reasons it's so unique that St. Francis invites senior citizens in to participate in these dialogues with you is they know the history. So when we run around talking about Black Lives Matter and shutting down D.C. and having a march on millions, there are always people around that said, I remember when we did that in 1964 when they were killing black folks up in Harlem like crazy. So we need to connect that energy. You guys follow me here? Because if you don't connect the energy, what you lose is the fact that there may be some gems or kernels of wisdom that we lose by trying to reinvent the wheel because we think that we're dealing with something that's entirely new. Watch King here. He concludes. I love this. Many of them, those cases he's talking about, are now lost in the thick fog of oblivion. But at least one stands before us now with glaring dimensions. People won't remember Yusef Hawkins. In a couple years, people won't remember Tamir Rice or Sandra Bland. People won't remember Raynette Turner. Doesn't matter if they remember them. What it matters is if you can tap into the understanding that whatever stands before you in that moment is your opportunity moment. You guys follow me here? Whatever is that moment, that's your opportunity moment. If you watched the Jackie Robinson documentary on PBS, you saw me. I'm in that too. You guys are very good for my career. Every time I come to St. Francis, I'm in a documentary, then the Black Panther documentary, and then I was in the Jackie Robinson documentary. I'm like, please bring me back. They're doing one on Vietnam. But I'm in the Jackie Robinson documentary, and one of the things that Kim Burns, one of the questions that Kim Burns asked me was, he said, well, how do you place Jackie? I mean, explain to us what Jackie consciousness was. And I said, Jackie was a race man. It's ironic that most people call him Jackie Robinson because he hated the name Jackie. His name was Jack. He didn't appreciate that. he was a man of tremendous pride, right? And if you watch the documentary, one of the things that you'll learn about him very quickly is that Jack fought back at all times. The irony of him being the person that Branch Rickey decided to embark on this experiment with are pretty extreme when you consider that in 1944, Jack was nearly court-martialed for refusing to give up his seat on a segregated bus in Texas while he was in the military. It's why Martin Luther King, when Jack is inducted into the Hall of Fame, says, Jackie Robinson was a freedom rider before the freedom rides. Because in 1954, a full decade before Rosa Parks did it, Jack did it on a segregated bus in Texas. Now, why didn't that catch fire? That's my point. You guys follow me here? Because it's not always going to catch fire, but it doesn't mean that people don't have to take the action and refuse to give up the seat. Because freedom is a persistent and constant struggle. Follow me here, because Jack commented on police brutality. This is Jack in 1964 talking about the situation in Harlem after there were riots and beatings of police. Jackie Robinson, I think our police commissioner must be warned that police brutality will not be tolerated by who? And who else? See, this is very interesting to me because sometimes when we talk about people of color, we assume that we're just talking about black folk. But if you study the historical record, which you'll find a lot of times, think about somebody like Arturo Schomburg, whom the Schomburg Center is named for, you'll find this African diaspora, Cape Verdean, Puerto Rican, black folks. You guys follow me here? People from the West Indies. You're always going to find that. Jamaican. Watch this. He continues. There have been too much of it, and unless it's seriously curtailed, there can be serious and crucial times ahead for the city. Harlem, Jackie continued, is the key to the Negro areas throughout the country, and efforts by Commissioner Murphy or the mayor to meet and ease problems here in police brutality will have an effect throughout the nation. What is Jackie Robinson saying? You know what, Mr. Mayor? You know what, Police Commissioner? You have an opportunity to lead. If we get it right here. But see, that's the Jackie Robinson you don't know. Martin Luther King commented on hands up, don't shoot. No, he didn't, Dr. Williams. How could he comment on hands up, don't shoot? Because that's a different, you're making stuff up. Yes, I am. But follow me. Martin Luther King, I am making stuff up, had a Black Lives Matter moment. Because one of the things that I want to emphasize to you today is that it might be utilitarian for us to think in terms of Black Lives Matter, not in terms of a movement in the present, but at least in terms of understanding its history as Black Lives Matter moments. Those moments when, for whatever reason, we were forced to focus in on some trauma that was taking place and respond. And probably the best example I can give you of that was made into a movie last year, Selma. How many of you saw Selma in the theaters? Raise your hand. See, they bill Selma as if it's the story of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and certainly in the movie it is, and it's all about the internal turmoil that Dr. King has gone through with his marriage and what's happening with SCLC and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. But at the end of the day, what Selma's about is a Black Lives Matter moment. Because it was the murder of Jimmy Lee Jackson that led to, and if you saw the movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you didn't see the movie, this is Jimmy Lee Jackson. He was killed after a guy named James Orange was arrested and imprisoned, and the people who were part of the Selma movement decided they were going to have a night march, which was very dangerous during the civil rights movement. It's bad enough to march in the day, but to march at night was to invite violence. It's not like the state troopers were exercising a great deal of restraint anyway, so to march at night was to ask to be hit with a baton and have a dog sicked on you or possibly even be shot. So what they did was tremendously courageous. Jimmy Lee Jackson, his mother, and his aged grandfather are out as part of this march, and they're chased by some state troopers into a restaurant, and Jimmy Lee Jackson is trying to protect his mother, and he's killed by one of the officers. That's what led to the march over the Edmund Pettus Bridge, which ultimately resulted in the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It was a Black Lives Matter moment, and I say that to you because this is the officer who did it. I want to point out, he was never arrested at the time. It took years. In fact, when was he finally convicted? He was finally convicted in 2005. But I want to point out to you that it doesn't mean that the movement didn't matter, because it was that murder, as senseless as it may have seemed, that led to the organizing, that led to the passage of the Voting Rights Act, that in 2005, at the same time this clown was going to prison, was being overturned and rolled back by the Roberts Court. Because freedom is a persistent, constant struggle, and if you give up and you don't recognize that you have to constantly fight and contest for those rights, then you're going to lose them anyway. Everybody follow me here? Is it hot in here? Y'all having a good time yet? Are we there yet? She got a fan like back in the day.
I wish I had mine.
I was thinking, except I'll fan you occasionally, but I'm just... So follow me here. Martin Luther King gives this speech at Jimmy Lee Jackson's funeral. And I want to read part of that speech to you because, again, this is the Reverend Dr. King you don't know that we don't know. This isn't the Reverend Dr. King, I have a dream of little white kids and black. You know, that's the optimistic, big thinking King. But I need you to know the on-the-ground organizing King. So listen to what King says. A state trooper pointed the gun, but he did not act alone. He, Jimmy Lee Jackson, was murdered by the brutality of every sheriff who practices lawlessness in the name of law. Same could be said for the killers of Trayvon Martin, of Tamir Rice, of Sandra Bland. He continues. He was murdered by the irresponsibility of every politician from governors on down who has fed his constituents the stale bread of hatred and the spoiled meat of racism. Now, hold on, folks. I mean, I'm not trying to get political because I'm very happy that Provost wanted to have me back and the class wanted to have me back. But I got to be honest. I close my eyes and I hear Donald Trump. We're going to build a wall. Who's going to pay for the wall? Mexico's going to pay for the wall. There are consequences when you say things like that because people don't recognize that we don't care much about what the rest of the world thinks, but the rest of the world cares a lot about what we do and what we say. And it's going to resonate in ways that ultimately will make us less secure and give us less of a voice in world affairs because what we end up doing is pissing away what little credibility and integrity we have because at least our founding documents articulated respect for life, liberty, justice, and democracy. But in reality, when we don't follow through on that, then it's very difficult for Americans to understand why people in the Middle East, across the Middle East, develop an unconscious hatred toward Americans. Why when Americans go to Europe, right, I have a good friend from Portugal who texts me all the time, and she's always like, I don't understand how you guys could even have a Donald Trump on the campaign trail. Do you not realize how that's playing on the international sphere? Do you not recognize that that's what Dr. King is saying? He's saying, look, Donald Trump doesn't have to pull any triggers, right? But when somebody gets punched at a rally, you can say, oh, I didn't say anything. I just was kind of standing. You're part and parcel of the disease that is fed, the injustice, that the cancer. Anyway, because this is going to be a long day. He was murdered. It's going to be a long day. He was murdered by the timidity of a federal government that can spend millions of dollars a day to keep troops in South Vietnam and cannot protect the rights of its own citizens seeking the right to vote. Think about that. Think about that. You know, one of the things that was so surprising about the Ferguson Commission report is that the Attorney General of the federal government determined that in Ferguson, literally, they're fleecing the poor. You know what? Forget that. I'm not even going to go there. Let me give you a better example. How in the hell is it? Oh, I cursed. I apologize. How is it possible that the United States can afford to be the policeman of the world and can't keep the water clean in Flint, Michigan for its own citizens? That's what Dr. King's saying. Guys, I'm sorry. He was murdered by the indifference of every white minister of the gospel who has remained silent behind the safe security of his stained glass windows. King called everybody out. Don't think he didn't get black folks, people of color. He was murdered by the cowardice of every Negro who passively accepts the evil of segregation and stands on the sidelines in the struggle for justice. That's the King we don't know, that we don't celebrate. That's the King responding to a Black Lives Matter moment. Because really what Dr. King is saying, if you want to boil this down to one phrase with a hashtag, Jimmy Lee Jackson's life mattered. Black lives matter. And if lives matter, then where do we find that language originally? We find it in the words of Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence, soon to be translated into the U.S. Constitution. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are, first, life. So if you're in a government which pledged itself, or in some way says that this is the cornerstone of its government, and you can't protect life, this is the basis, folks. I'm going to go through this very quickly. We'll talk about some documents of American tragedies. Because, see, the irony of the United States is that, as Christopher Eisgruber says, American society aspires to be both democratic and just. That's hard. Can you be both democratic and just? Because in a democracy, it's majority rule. So somebody's always going to be the odd person out. It's not going to get what they want. But you want to try to protect their rights. But Eisgruber continues, to insist that justice and democracy coincide makes heavy, but we may hope not unreasonable demands upon the American people. Listen to what he says. Until evidence forces us to give up the hope for a just democracy, the constitutional enterprise compels us to treat that hope as reasonable. And when people believe that the hope for a just democracy is reasonable, do you know what they do? They refuse to give up their seat on segregated buses. Do you know what they do? They marshal and rally for clean water in Flint, Michigan. Do you know what they do? They fight House Bill number 2 in North Carolina because they believe that we have the capability to be better than that. And what we celebrate in our history are those moments when we're triumphant. But the fact of the matter is, folks, more times than not, we're not triumphant. And what we end up doing is celebrating those moments when we don't live up to our values. Let me give you a couple of good examples. Why does it take 127 dead girls in the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire before you can put up? It's not like they didn't know. I mean, if you study that history, if you're a labor historian, if you're somebody who looks at the history of the late 19th and early 20th century, there have been major fires in Newark, New Jersey, Patterson, New Jersey. It was an epidemic. Why does it take 127 dead girls before you say we should put up fire alarms and figure out that doors should open from the inside out and there should be escape routes? Do you guys follow me here? And that employers shouldn't be able to trample on the rights of employees in ways that denigrate and deny their humanity. Because we want to produce a cheap product. American tragedies are those moments like Love Canal. Because everybody's talking about Flint, but people of a certain age, I got a couple slides in here for my people, because they're going to say nice things about me online. The young people won't, but my folks will. Like Love Canal, where literally you build a development on top of toxic waste, and you move people in and sell them home. You know, we go to the movie theaters to see things like the Amityville Horror, the Blair Witch Project. That's a true horror movie, because you privilege profit over life. Guys, follow me here. Hurricane Katrina was an American tragedy because you've got American citizens who are washed out by floodwaters, and literally you've got the federal government that seems impotent, incapable of doing anything to address the grinding need. You know, when Fidel Castro can thumb his nose at the United States and say, if the United States needs help from Cuba, we're willing to send down. That was embarrassing to us. Trayvon Martin and Christina Green are American tragedies. They're American tragedies because of the widespread availability of firearms in this country without regulation. Christina Green was the young woman that was killed when Congresswoman Gabby Giffords was shot in Arizona. That's a tragedy. The interesting thing is American tragedies force us to deal with how we navigate indifference. I was down in Texas a couple months ago with my good friend Peniel Joseph, who's been here, and Heather Martin, who is a local legislator in Texas, after Sandra Bland was killed, sent out on Twitter this message: "Dear uppity, mouthy, and criminal Chicago travelers in Texas, if you get snotty with our Texas DPS, we will pull you the F out of your car and place you under arrest. That's exactly what we pay them for. And if I see that go down, I will back up the officer every time. Do what you're told and STFU. You're incredibly lucky you didn't get tased or your head blown off. Just because you decided to kill yourself later does not make you anything other than a menace to society, as so clearly illustrated by the dash cam video." Now, what's wrong with our society? I love her. Every time I come here, I must get married. That is not good. Documentaries, marriage, not good. Falling in love. Watch this, guys, because what's wrong with our society when you guys should have seen this a couple months ago, or back in 2012, I'm sorry, there's a better one from a couple months ago. Kindergartners being thrown in jail. How do you do that? Or better yet, the McKinney pool party. Officer Casebolt rolling in and policing those black kids at the pool party as if they're, well, where does that come from? Assata Shakur, who the choir will know, was a member of the Black Panther Party. 1987 wrote a very popular biography of herself called Assata, and she wrote, "In prisons, it's not all uncommon to find prisoners hanged or burned to death in his cell." See, everybody assumes that Sandra Bland killed herself. Now, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. You will not find me walking around talking about aliens landed at Roswell. I don't believe that. You will find me walking around talking about all the injustices that go on behind prison walls. Read the work of Heather Thompson or half a dozen other scholars, contemporary scholars, who are talking about the problems in American prisons. We construct these giant edifices to warehouse human beings, and we treat them in an inhumane manner, and then we wonder why prisons are breeding grounds for crime and moral decay. Because you're putting people in a situation where they have to behave like animals in order to survive, because you cut off their pathways to normal. And then we go through this debate every couple years. Rothman wrote it this way: every generation rediscovers the prison and is shocked by what it finds. Why? Because one generation says, this is terrible, and then good times come and we forget, and then another generation comes and goes, this is terrible, and then we forget. But somebody at some point has to say that there's something fundamentally wrong with the way that we incarcerate people in this country. I got moments with Obama. I mean, it's almost over. And I'll tell you, when Christina Green was killed, Obama gave this speech in which he said, I want us to live up to her expectations. I want our democracy to be as good as she imagined it. This is powerful. Bring a tear to your eye. He continues, all of us, we should do everything we can to make this country live up to our children's expectations. That's fine in the abstract, but in reality, that requires a deep commitment in ways that this country has proved unable to commit itself. Because see, nobody gave a damn when black and brown kids were stabbing each other in New York City in the 1970s. But the minute guns showed up at Columbine High School, now we got a national problem. But if you'd have dealt with it, and I'm not talking about with metal detectors and foolishness like that, if you'd have dealt with it by opportunity, by ensuring small class sizes, by making sure people have pathways to careers, by not selling everybody an idea that, you know, the future is going to be science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, go to coding camps. That's not the future. The future is going to be in a deep investment in humanities where we learn to recognize the humanity of the people with whom we share the planet. Because that's our big problem. We have great technology and capability to kill and minimal ability to connect. Follow me. Obama was asking us to consider our core democratic values. And if I were to put this up, this is the National Council for the Social Studies. They put together these core democratic values for elementary students. I think this is cute. The National Council for the Social Studies says that this is what every elementary student should know, our core democratic values. Look at the very first one. Can't make this up. What is it? Each citizen has a right to the protection of their life. The irony is that you can interpret that as the state and individuals should do everything to protect life, or you can interpret that as Florida did. Stand your ground. The castle doctrine. No duty to retreat. Somebody just took my VCR. It's a VCR. Buy another one. And by the way, VCRs are outdated. Whatever you're shooting somebody over will be outdated next year. iPhone, you can have it. No, I mean, people get upset with me by this, but I'm just being honest, right? Because I remember back in the day, I had a Walkman that was the size of this thing. I go jogging with it. I thought it's portable, and I'm carrying you going jogging with tapes, all you hear is this. Right? Something like that. But I will also tell you that in the process of doing that, if somebody had taken that Walkman, look where we are now in the technology we have available today. These are things. What do we value more, life or things? Not if you live in Flint, because they value cheap water, right? Guys, follow me here. National Council for Social Studies continues. The pursuit of happiness. Each citizen can find happiness in their own ways as long as they don't infringe on the rights of others. If you interpret that one way, you get that people should have a right to use restrooms wherever. Because you know what? At the end of the day, it's a toilet. Thank you. And quite frankly, anybody spending a large amount of time in the restroom, I don't get it. Because it's a toilet. I don't like spending a large amount of time. If you want to spend a large amount, go for it. But as far as I'm concerned, it's a toilet. A toilet is a toilet, it's a toilet. The irony is that people complain about House Bill number 2 and what's happening in Raleigh, and you have to use bathrooms assigned to you by your birth. Question. Did you grow up in a household with a mother and a father, sisters and brothers? Yes. Did you use the bathroom in that house? Yes. Guess what? You're using gender-neutral bathrooms. Didn't bother you at home, shouldn't bother you anyplace else.
And handicap bedrooms.
I am in love. I'm going to get you a number after. Guys, we're on video too. I'm in trouble. I will not be back. Guys, follow me here. Liberty. Liberty includes the freedom to believe what you want, freedom to choose your friends, to express your ideas and opinions in public, the right for people to meet in groups. It's ironic now what's happening at these Trump rallies where people are saying, how dare they come and you have a right to peacefully congregate and protest. The government for grievances and others for as long as they're peaceful, and they've been peaceful. I'd run through the rest of these, but I think this one is really good. Truth, the government and citizens should not lie. I don't want to make you uncomfortable, folks, but I think part of the problem that we deal with in looking at the Black Lives Matter movement instead of Black Lives Matter moment is this image from 1967, July 28th. This is 12-year-old Joe Bass Jr., shotgunned by a state trooper for looting. Whatever was in that. And you know what always blows me away? The irony of this. What's the name of the magazine? What magazine was it in? Fortunately, Joe survived. Not much of a life after you get shotgunned at 12, but he survived. I asked you to look at those two documents because in a lot of ways, this cartoon encapsulates the argument that I want to make about Black Lives Matter in the past. A lot of people will tell you that what's happening to black and brown people in the streets of America today by the police is lynching. It's not. That's a false comparison. It's ahistorical to make that analogy. They're very different phenomena. But there are things about lynching that resemble or echo what we're seeing today. This cartoonist managed very powerfully to make that case using Mumia Abu-Jamal. Anybody know who he is? Yes. Who is he? Help me. Former member of the Black Panther Party that was convicted for the killing of a Philadelphia police officer in 1981, was on death row for many, many years, and ultimately was taken off death row. The cartoonist was trying to make this case, calling this a history of American lynching. Whether the violence is done extra-legally by men that come in the cover of night wearing white robes and hoods because they recognize that what they're doing is illegal and they have to conceal their identity because if they're caught, they recognize that it's murder. Or it's done by men in dark robes who use the vehicles of trumped up charges, modified DNA evidence, messed up laws, whatever it may be. The injustice is the same. Now, that's fine for the cartoonist. We want to be very specific in talking about the history. So I want to deal with two documents with you today. The first one is American Violence by Richard Maxwell Brown. The other one is a Nodina lynching from 1921. So let's take a look at those together. Read the whole title for me. I'm sorry, sir. John Wesley Hardin of Texas, what?
Peerless gunman, 1868 to 75.
Guys, let me just do vocabulary with you very quickly. What does peerless mean? Genius. She's getting all the geniuses today. Peerless means without equal. Now I'm going to ask you guys a question. We'll just take a quick survey. Don't read anything else. Just relax. Here's Richard Maxwell Brown, who you don't know, who is a very famous historian. Here's Richard Maxwell Brown, this distinguished historian who taught at Princeton, right? Very well known, much more distinguished than myself, who's talking about John Wesley Hardin of Texas, peerless gunman, gunman without equal. How many of you know who John Wesley Hardin is? Raise your hand. See, we got a problem here because a distinguished historian just told you that this person is renowned in history. Do you know any other gunslingers in history? Let me throw a couple names out. Jesse James? Yes. Billy the Kid? Yes. So the question is, why don't you know John Wesley Hardin? Do you guys follow where I'm going here?
Yeah, because he didn't know the white and he happened just to be African American, so he doesn't get the recognition.
I love that answer. I love that answer, and somebody else gave it to me too. I'm gonna play this game with you for just a second. Follow me here. Automatically, because African American history, we'll assume that maybe he's black. I'm about to blow you away. Let's read this together. Justin, do you mind? The greatest of all Western gunmen was John Wesley Hardin of Texas. Keep going, sir.
In a 7-year period,
He killed
more than 20 men, more than Billy the Kid, Jesse James, both of whom surpassed him in notoriety. Hardin never
Hold. So he killed more men than Billy the Kid and Jesse James, both of whom surpassed him. So we got a crime scene here. Why don't we know who this guy is? You guys follow me here? Everybody intrigued so far? Because I also want to point out something to you here. Narratives are important. Stories are important. The way you frame a story is critical. You know why I'm saying that? Because remember with Trayvon Martin, they kept saying that George Zimmerman was a neighborhood watch captain? That made him sound legitimate. You know what a neighborhood watch captain is? A guy that walks around and says he's a neighborhood watch captain. Since we're making stuff up, I'm a provost of a university. I'm not. I could say it. It sounds official. You guys follow me here? But the reality is that it's not what I am. Keep going, sir.
Hardin never killed for money.
And although a fugitive from justice was not a criminal in the usual sense of the word. What? Time out. How? Oh, I love the look on your face. Help me here, folks. Hardin never killed for money. But
And although often a fugitive from justice was not a criminal in the usual sense of the word.
question, how can one kill people, be a fugitive, but not be a criminal in the usual sense of the word? Say it again. Say it again. I love where we are now.
He was related to somebody.
It's going to be a long day. I love where you are. Can I borrow? Well, no, keep going. You know, you can tell I have this committed to memory. Go ahead, sir.
Rather as a killer of
He was a product of his place and, I'm sorry, I'm beating you to this, but I love this. Keep going.
the son of the Methodist minister. Hardin was born in 1856. He grew up in the violent region of Central Texas and as a youth was ardently pro-Southern and anti-Negro.
Stop. So we know he's not black unless there's an episode of Dave Chappelle. He's clearly not African American. You all know what I'm talking about. Guys, I want to point out something to you here, and I'm just going to take this young woman's comments because they were great. What's your name again? Marilyn said, he killed black people. You don't get credit for killing people that don't shoot back or who don't matter. That's a Black Lives Matter moment. You guys follow me here? I'm actually going to read to you from his manuscript because when he died, he left an autobiography of all of his great killings. His first killing was at the age of 15. We're going to read that together. But I want to point out to you that, as you said, Marilyn, you beat everybody to the punchline. He may have killed more men, but who were you shooting? You guys follow me here? Let's go skip down to the autobiography when he's talking about it begins Hardin's first victim, the Negro Madge. Go ahead.
In the fall of 1868, I went down to my uncle's, Barnett Hardin, in Polk County, about 4 miles north of Livingstone. I was in the habit of making these trips, though I was then but 15 years old. This time they were making sugar, and I took the trip to see them.
My pistol, of course. Why does a 15-year-old... See this, I love this. Maybe in Reconstruction era Texas, a 15-year-old needs to carry a pistol around. Was he hunting? He's shooting black people. You guys follow me here? Guys, I'm gonna borrow yours very quickly. I'm gonna pick up for you, Justin, because I'm gonna run quick. Guys, follow me. I got that big teacher voice. Watch me here. This time they were making sugar. I met a Negro named Madge close to Moscow who had belonged to Judge Holhausen. Note the language. Who had what? No. He was nobody. You guys follow me here? He was a former slave. He ain't nobody. You guys follow me or not? Watch, watch, watch. I don't want to lose you. I know it's hot. Don't want to put you to sleep, but follow me. I had a cousin named Barnett Jones who matched himself and me against the Moscow Negro in a wrestling bout. The Negro was a large, powerful man, and we were but 2 boys. Nevertheless, we threw him down the first fall. He was not satisfied, so we threw him again, and this time scratched his face a little and made it bleed. Negro-like, he got mad. Time out. Do you think, I just want you to think through this, critically thinking, what you know about Reconstruction era America and Reconstruction era Texas, that a black man is going to be standing on the side of the road with a t-shirt on that says WWE, come wrestle me. Wrestle. You realize from what you know because of the history of that period and the oppressive labor systems that were put in place, that there would have been no way that he could have touched these 2 boys without putting his life in mortal jeopardy. The whole story is problematic. The narrative that he's constructed is problematic. But he's trying to sell you, listen to me, on an injury. I killed this Negro because he did something to me. Because we matched ourselves in a wrestling bout, and we threw him down twice. Probably what happened, I don't know, I wasn't there, but the way I'm looking at it, they, black man can't hit it back, they're jumping on the black man, they're two 15-year-old silly boys, because that's what 15-year-old silly boys do. Then they cut him or scratched him, and he was like, wait a minute. 13th Amendment, 14th, the hell? You're not going to make me believe, time out. You guys follow me here? Sound more reasonable? I don't know. Watch the end of this. I think you'll find this very fascinating. He continues. He got mad, Negro like he got mad and said he would whip me and would do it. Barnett and others standing around stopped us from fighting. This seemed to make Madge all the more angry. He said he would kill me and went after his gun. I went up to the house to get mine too, but Uncle Barnett got onto the game and made me stay in the house while that Negro went around cursing and abusing me, saying that he would kill me or die himself, that no white boy could draw his blood and live, that a bird never flew too high not to come to the ground. Uncle Barnett then took a hand and ordered Madge off the plantation. Now, you guys understand what happened here. Somebody done lost a day's wages, and some kid's 15-year-old who's got access to a gun's feelings are hurt. The next day, Hardin encounters Madge. I stopped in the road, and he came at me with a big stick. He struck me, and as he did, I pulled out a Colt 44 6-shooter and told him to get back. This sounds like an account from the LAPD. I'm not being funny. Now, all of a sudden, he's got restraint. You hit me with a stick, and it's like, please, step back. Follow me. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose you. By this time, he had my horse by the bridle, but I shot him loose. He kept coming back, and every time he would start, I would shoot again and again until I shot him down. I went to my Uncle Clabe Holhausen and brought him and another man back to where Madge was lying. Madge still showed fight and called me a what? Probably because you told the story you just told us. You guys follow me here? Yeah. Concludes. If it had not been for my uncle, I would have shot him again. Uncle Holhausen gave me a $20 gold piece and told me to go home and tell my father. What did we learn about his father in the previous thing? What was his father? A Methodist. To go home and tell my father, the minister, about the big fight. See, I want you to understand the culture now. I want you to understand. Do you guys follow me? Last part, I promise. That Madge was bound to die, and for me to look out for Yankee soldiers who were all over the country at that time, Texas, like other states, was overrun with carpetbaggers and bureau agents who had the United States Army to back them up in their meanness. That means Reconstruction. That means the federal troops were down there trying to protect black lives. From what? The same thing that you just read about. And here's Richard Maxwell Brown saying, this is the greatest of all Western gunmen. Last sentence. This was the first man, or Madge shortly died in November 1868. This was the first man I ever killed, and it nearly distracted my father and mother when I told them. Meaning what?
I don't know.
They didn't care. Look, guys, I got one more for you. Take a look at the American lynching from Nodina, Arkansas. Yes, sir.
Bob Dylan had a song about
John Wesley Hardin. I love you. Extra points for you. You remember that. It's great. I know this is difficult for you guys to see, but I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. I just want to point out to you, if you open up to the first page, that if you look up the word, this is what I mean by narratives, right? So if you look up the word lynching in the dictionary, the first thing that it tells you, spontaneous, or when you hear lynching, what do you think about? Brilliant. You just used a very important word, sir. Mob. When you hear the word mob, what do you think about automatically? Riot. Uncontrolled, right? Group of people that comes together for some purpose, but it's chaotic, it's disorderly, right? That's what a mob is, correct? Yep. I want you to just open up to that first page, and I just want to read some headlines. Let's read the headline at the the second one. It says Avengers. Who wants to read that for me? Yes, sir.
Avengers set 6 o'clock as lynching hour.
Question. Avengers set 6 o'clock meaning what?
They plan to meditate.
Guys, I want to point out something to you. The language that we use, very important, right? Mob, lynching, extra. I'm going to borrow yours real quick because I just got it. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm just going to read this to you. I think you'll find this cute. A party of 7 in 2 automobiles with Henry Lowry, Negro murder of 2 members of the Craig family on Christmas Day, stopped here at 12 o'clock Wednesday afternoon on the way for Sardis, where they took the prisoners from officers to Richardson's Landing. I want to point out that these men took this black man who was in custody from the custody and control of police, and now they're driving with him, and a reporter is following them. Do you guys follow me here? I'm not done yet. Don't relax. Have a donut. Get your blood sugar up, because you're not going to be able to handle this. He continues, where they will cross over and be joined by a party waiting on Arkansas side, prepared to lynch Lowry promptly at 6 o'clock. What does that tell you? Lowry ain't dead yet. This is a running commentary on what's going to happen. Watch this. The party stopped at Fowler's restaurant for lunch. The Negro was taken into the restaurant and kept under observation while the party ate. The Negro said nothing but showed the strain he was under. He's satisfied that he was on his way to death. A number of Millington citizens were attracted to the restaurant, and a few accompanied the party to the landing. They are now expected to cross the river. Why? Gee, because why would the newspaper say our people are going to participate in this? Because what the reporter is documenting is the prelude to a murder. Do you guys follow me here?
But they were all in on it anyway. It's like Mississippi burning. They were all in on it.
She's a historian. I'm telling you. I got space in my department for you at Fairfield after we get married. Follow this, folks. I want you to follow what she said, because this is very important. This is well planned and well orchestrated. You guys follow me here? I'm going to read the last part to you because it's going to blow you away. Nothing occurred to mar the serenity of the journey. I love the way that this guy writes. I mean, he's painting a picture for you. Let's read some of these. Negro burned at stake, 500-watt Slayer roast for 30 minutes. No troops ordered to Odina, Arkansas. Governor McCrae makes fruitless effort to reach the sheriff as mob plans for lynching bee. What mob? We just read in the previous article that they're traveling through the state, so much so that a reporter can have lunch with them and map out where they're going, what time they're going to be there, who's going to be there, who's crossing the river, where they're going to do it, and the governor goes, I don't know where to send troops. The only reason I deal with this with you guys today is this. I don't want you to walk out of here and try to make the case, as some people have, that what we're looking at today is lynching or extra-legal violence. Because what I want to point out is that what was happening here, what happened with John was, that's illegal. What's happening today is being carried out by officers of the law. Yep. Do you guys understand the distinction and why that's important? I say that to you because even here, Newark, New Jersey, 1967, you see this famous image of this kid running down the street. Who's policing that space is the National Guard. But in Missouri in 2014, when all that stuff broke out in Ferguson, that ain't the National Guard. Those are the police. They just look like the National Guard because they have all that surplus from the war, the Gulf War, that's come back to American cities that we're now equipping police with. So they look, and then somebody had a sense of humor and they wrote on the mailbox, what? Boys in the Hood. I can't say it, but you can see it. Blank the police. I think it's curious for me. I know I'm out of time, right? I want to point out to you just very quickly that I think it's curious that these two images stand out for me. This is 1989, Tiananmen Square. And this young man, nameless person who we know, who took a stand against the totalitarian regime in China to make the case that there should be democratic reform ushered into China. I love this image because this is Ferguson, Missouri in 2014, and it's this little boy. And to me, it encapsulates so powerfully how Black Lives Matter connects with our struggle to ensure a just democracy. Because if we really want core democratic values, if we really want the society that Obama says that Christina Green imagined that we want to deliver, then we can't deliver it as long as we deny that what's happening in places like Flint, that what's happening in Missouri, that what's happening in Texas and in Baltimore and other places compromises our democracy. Guys, I want to point out to you that I'm definitely going to be done. In those core democratic values, it says all people should be treated fairly and getting advantages and disadvantages of country. No group of persons should be favored. Then why is it in Flint they can't protect the water in Flint, but in Flint it's a crime to wear saggy pants? What's the punishment? If you sag your pants in Flint, punishment is either 93 days to a year in jail and up to a $500 fine. Now, I want to point out to you why that's criminal, and I want to tie it to the Ferguson Committee, and then I'm going to run out of here like I'm Bruce Springsteen. Listen to me. 93 days in jail for sagging your pants. Why are we warehousing human beings for something that simply requires pull your pants up? A $500 fine that you can't pay then ensures that not only you can do the time in jail. You guys follow me here? This is what they talked about in Ferguson. I need you to understand that this is criminal and it's undemocratic. I need you to understand that once you commit this crime, you can be disfranchised by virtue of the fact that you've committed a crime. That then you're not, and this is for wearing your, so we're putting people in jail and paying for them to be in jail for wearing their pants. Don't we have more important things to be concerned about as a society?
And that's what people been saying. That's why people are fed up with the prison system.
Absolutely. She can finish my lecture for me. I really do love her. Guys, I'm out of time, but I want to just say one last thing to you. It's the reason why, if you look back at this whole question of incarceration, even before the ink was dry in the 13th Amendment, you have built into the law these mechanisms that rendered the protections in that amendment nugatory. Why do you say that, Dr. Williams? The 13th Amendment says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist except as punishment for a crime. They built into the language the caveat that if you can be branded a criminal for whatever reason, then you can lose your right to citizenship. Do you guys understand? So what do you end up doing? We've seen this throughout history in this country. You criminalize trivial things. In South Carolina, the penalty for stealing a chicken was 10 years hard labor. We laugh at that as some kind of historical anomaly, and yet I just told you the penalty for sagging your pants in Flint, Michigan in 2016 is 93 days in jail and a $500 fine. And who are the people that sag their pants? Guys, I'm done, but I read this to you. Ruffin versus Commonwealth, 1871. A convicted felon, he is for the time being a what? He is civil mortis, and his estate, if he has any, is administered as that of a dead man. He is robbed of his citizenship. He's robbed of his place. He's robbed of his humanity. You know, Emily, professor, was sweet enough to have me back, and I overtalked my time. But that's what I do. It's been a privilege to be with you guys again. Thank you.